So, a military strike on Iran by the US and Israel has just sent shockwaves across the entire globe. But what if I told you this wasn't just another regional flare-up? Let's follow the ripples from this one event and see how they could change, well, pretty much everything, from the price you pay for gas to the actual balance of global power.
And while the headlines were dramatic, for a lot of people who watch geopolitics closely, this was almost inevitable. The drumbeats of war, as one source puts it, they'd been getting louder and louder for weeks. It really wasn't a question of if it would happen, but when.
All right, so to really get a grip on the global impact, we have to start right there, at the epicenter. Let's dig into the initial military actions that basically lit the fuse on this whole crisis.
To really understand the stakes, you have to look at the map. We're talking about the Persian Gulf, a region that is crisscrossed by absolutely vital shipping lanes. This is a very, very crowded space, and that proximity, that closeness, is exactly why the situation is so incredibly tense.
So the conflict kicked off with these targeted strikes by the US and Israel. And Iran's retaliation? It was swift and it was aimed right at American military infrastructure. And just like that, you have this incredibly dangerous tit-for-tat dynamic that brought the entire region's economic and military activity to a grinding halt.
And that halt in activity, well, that sends out our first major ripple. Let's see how this thing builds by looking at the impact on what is arguably the world's most critical artery for oil.
We hear this term choke point thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean? Well, it's basically a narrow passage, like the Strait of Hormuz, where a huge amount of global trade is forced to squeeze through. It's like a traffic jam on a global highway. And if you control that choke point, you have some serious leverage over the world's economy. And the amount of leverage we're talking about here, it is staggering. Every single day, 20 million barrels of crude oil pass through this one narrow strait. That's an almost unimaginable amount of energy that keeps our world running.
This slide really puts the scale of that dependency into perspective. We're talking about nearly a third, 30% of all the oil and natural gas that travels by sea, all of it squeezing through this one single passage. So when this route is threatened, the entire global energy market feels it instantly.
So what does that actually mean for prices? Well, this table from Alliance breaks it down really clearly. If the conflict is short, prices jump to $85 a barrel. If it drags on, we're looking at $100. And in a worst-case tail risk scenario, with infrastructure getting damaged, oil could surge past $130. The link here is direct and it is severe.
And those rising oil prices, they create our next ripple, the global economic shockwave. And this isn't just about traders on Wall Street. This is about real, tangible consequences for economies and, frankly, for households all over the world.
So why does this matter to you? Because higher oil prices mean higher inflation. For every 10% jump in the price of a barrel, inflation can tick up by as much as 0.2 percentage points. And that means higher prices at the pump, more expensive groceries, and just a tighter squeeze on your wallet. This shock also hits the financial markets, and it hits them hard. In that worst-case scenario we just talked about, with oil over $130, the analysis projects a potential 20% drop in U.S. stock markets and a 10% drop in Europe. It just highlights how incredibly vulnerable global financial stability is to a conflict in this one single region. But, this economic pressure isn't felt equally across the board. Some industries actually stand to gain. Think about energy producers outside the Gulf or defense contractors. But on the flip side, for industries like airlines that are so heavily dependent on fuel, this is devastating. It puts enormous pressure on their costs and their ability to stay profitable.
Okay, so beyond the economic impact, there's a third, and honestly maybe the most profound ripple of all, the geopolitical chess match that's playing out between the world's superpowers.
And at the center of this whole new dynamic, you have the United States and you have China. Their approaches to foreign policy are fundamentally different. One based on intervention, the other on investment, and they're being tested in real time right here in the Middle East. The outcome could reshape this region for decades to come.
And this slide just lays out those competing visions so clearly. The source material describes the Western approach as being characterized by things like ultimatums and military intervention. In stark contrast, China's philosophy is presented as one that's focused on economic ties and non-interference, playing the long game.
And we're already seeing how this is playing out on the ground. According to this analysis, by not picking sides, China is increasingly being seen as a potential mediator. We saw this with the restoration of ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that was a major, major diplomatic win for Beijing.
So you take all of this,
The military strikes, the economic shocks, the shifting alliances, and it all points to a final, profound conclusion. We may be witnessing the dawn of a truly new world order.
The central argument here is that the unipolar moment is ending. You know, that's the period after the Cold War where the US was pretty much the undisputed global superpower. Well, that's crumbling, and what's replacing it isn't another single power, but a multipolar world with multiple centers of influence.
And this isn't just a theory. You can see the signs of it everywhere. I mean, a key U.S. ally like Saudi Arabia denying the use of its airspace for strikes, that is a huge signal. You see Iran joining blocs like BRICS, and more you're hearing regional powers say they want to manage their own security without any outside intervention. The pieces on the chessboard are all moving.
And all this leaves us with the ultimate question. As this old unipolar order gives way to a new, multipolar world, does this massive realignment make global conflict more likely, or could it, paradoxically, maybe lead to a more stable, balanced peace? That is the critical uncertainty we are all facing right now.